Many Christians, rightly concerned about protecting the church's witness in front of a wider world, have embraced claims about the church that just aren't true. For the Colson Center, I'm John Stonestreet. This is Breakpoint. Last week, Pastor Josh Howerton of Lake Point Church of Dallas shared a fascinating Twitter thread demonstrating that when it comes to the way the wider world perceives the church, perception's not always reality. Citing research from the Barna Group and others, Pastor Howerton debunked the popular myth of the pro-life evangelical who cares only about babies until they're born, but not once they are outside of the womb. In actuality, practicing American Christians are more than twice as likely as non-Christians to adopt. And then there's the accusation that conservative Christians are sexually repressed, obsessed with purity culture, even the sexual oppression of women. Well, the research actually shows that couples who identify as highly religious report having the most satisfied sexual lives, and those numbers are even higher for women than for men. A more recently popular accusation is that American churches are rampant with abuses of power, gaslighting, and narcissistic leaders. Well, to be sure, those problems exist. It's illustrated not that long ago by Christianity Today's podcast, The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill. But the data shows clearly that regularly attending church on the whole dramatically improves people's mental and emotional health, accounting for a 33% decreased risk in deaths from despair, a 50% reduced risk of divorce, and 29% reduced risk of depression. And that divorce number is instructive for another stat that we often hear, that those inside the church divorce just as much as those outside of the church. Turns out not to be true. Now, of course, the church has plenty of problems, but how has the gap between reality and perception grown so wide? Well, at least part of the problem is myopia. It's human nature, after all, to think that our perception of the world is the true one and to downplay, even ignore evidence to the contrary. And that's especially true when we're trying to stand with victims or work for wrongs to be righted. Even so, ours is a culture that rewards self-preoccupation. In 1979, sociologist Christopher Lasch wrote The Culture of Narcissism, arguing that as the stronger bonds of religious identity and family were eroding, Americans were increasingly looking inward for security and meaning. In such a culture, those feelings and subjective experiences aren't just considered the most important thing in the world to an individual, they're also considered the most accurate view of the world. And in a culture like ours, special social status is awarded to people who are perceived as victims. Thus, testimonies of victimization, both inside and outside the church, just play louder. Stories of everyday faithfulness, sacrifice, ministry, they kind of seem boring. And in a secular culture that's increasingly hostile to Christianity, a person's negative experience at church or overall disdain for Christianity will be better received, more readily believed than any testimony to the contrary, even if that one person's perception is false or at least uncommon. Simply put, a lot of people just don't want to like the church. In some cases, they've got good reason, and when that happens, it should always grieve us, but it should not surprise us when a secular culture skeptical of moral realities flinches at the moral certainty offered in Scripture. Atheist Thomas Nagel honestly put it this way: it isn't just that I don't believe in God, I don't want there to be a God. I don't want the universe to be like that. Describing the culture of narcissism, Christopher Lasch wrote, "The contemporary climate is therapeutic, not religious. People today hunger not for personal salvation, but for the feeling, the momentary illusion of personal well-being, health, psychic security. Even though the Christian life offers the best path for human flourishing, it doesn't promise personal comfort. In fact, Jesus promised that the difficult grind of sanctification, the self-sacrifice, commitment, generosity we're all called to, wouldn't always come across well, not to others, not even to ourselves. He said the world would hate us because the world hated him, because darkness hates the light. As Christians, our response should always be to continue to offer the invitation, but not resort to self-flagellation. The reason the data shows that Christians are living more satisfied lives isn't because Christians are somehow better people. Any successes that we've had is only because of God working through us. Without Him, Jesus said, we can do nothing. The real advantage to being a Christian is the ability to see reality as it really is. It only makes sense that people willing to accept the Bible as the true account of the world would be the people most able to live at peace within the world. And if we found that peace, it's because of God's grace. So we invite a lost culture to come and experience it for itself. Because the data doesn't lie, neither does the Bible. For the Colson Center, I'm John Stonestreet with Breakpoint.